Do companies really deserve marketers anymore?
There's like a fine line between decisive leaders and executive thrashing.
If you're trying to build an audience around your brand on organic social, you are in trouble and wasting your time. Humans are still largely making fear-based decisions, and it's super boring.
I'm Margaret Kelsey.
And I'm Devin Bramhall.
And this is Don't Say Content,
a show created in partnership with Share Your Genius. After a longer break than we normally take, which we very much needed, and now it's like the other side stressful because everyone keeps asking, like, when is it coming back? So now I'm like stressed. And I'm like, we need to release this. We thought we'd kick off the season talking about the state of marketing. I was inspired by a post that Robert Rose shared, which by the time you hear this is a
Months
while
old.
ago. Yeah. But CMI does their annual content marketing trends. And I was really curious about what was going on this year and if it was any different than what we've seen. And that was really the inspiration behind, let's talk about what's going on. And I feel like there's three categories, right? There's like the marketing team and budgets category. There's the channels are working.
Yeah.
And what tactics people are using. That's at least what other people are talking to me about the most. Okay, so there's like the anecdotal stuff first, which I feel like there's one, and this isn't going to be obvious, but like all the marketing agencies that had tough years up and down or just down, starting in the fall, all of a sudden, the sentiment changed a lot. Everybody was saying to me like, oh, actually things are picking up this fall. Or, oh, I just landed a big client and that saved us. So I was curious about what that meant, how that was manifesting in any other areas. So I asked my friend who does executive recruiting and she does hire for marketing roles. And she was like, yeah, it's been a slow year, but she said she's seeing a slight sentiment change from hiring teams at larger companies where they're like, we're open to exploring this role and in 2025. And so she said like her hope was like, hey, I hope this trickles down further. It starts up here and then the smaller companies look at that and say, okay, yeah, like we got to ramp up hiring or whatever.
I've even seen it with the freelancers, solopreneurs I know that had a slower summer and then now are like inundated. Like it does feel like everything's starting to pick back up in the marketing sphere.
But like inch by inch.
Yeah.
Cause like even I'm like the worst consultant because I'm like never looking for work. I'm like, oh, I'll look for work. Like I'll line up a client later. But I had a client that wrapped up in August and I've been focusing on these other things that I'm working on, like the newsletter and the book and the YouTube channel. So I was like, I'll land a client for January and give myself a head start.
Yeah.
But I had 2 clients come my way and I did notice that I really put my back into landing this client. I really wanted to work for her and she came via referral. And I just realized I was like, I'm working harder at closing deals even as a solopreneur. And I've seen my other friends talk about that as well. Extreme price sensitivity, even for single digit prices. Single digit, that's wrong.
Like $5?
No, I did that wrong. Math is hard. Single, like $2,000 deals or something, really small ones. So that is like people are getting work, but
not being able to set their own prices right now.
Or just, it's a lot of people are extremely price conscious still.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, there are several people I know looking for new roles who are in higher up marketing positions. And a lot of them are choosing to, even if they're kind of like, I want to go somewhere else, they're staying because the options available aren't good enough for them. And they're like, this isn't better.
Yeah.
And so they're sticking around and waiting. But I know from a few people recently that there's like a few more exciting jobs coming up. And even this sort of re-emergence of the full stack marketer, like going back to the generalist. I don't know.
Mhm.
What is it like? What's the marketing team like at your company?
We're super small. So I have a writer and a designer right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is that? How's that going?
It's good. That's what we need right now. I don't think that I don't have the right resources. I think next year it'll be interesting as we start to really do more external marketing. And what I mean by that is this year when I first came in, it's a lot of internal voice and tone training, like making sure the cultural values are documented and that we're starting to spread those internally. It's been a lot more of the internal culture piece that then will obviously make it so it's much easier for our external brand to show up in a way that feels really aligned and feels effortless as we scale. But definitely as I came in and for this year, the focus has been on like building the internal foundations. So that way in 2025, we can let loose and be broadly in the market.
Your audience, just in case no one listened to our bonus episode,
Yeah.
you're less digital marketing and more event-based marketing and hand-to-hand combat, as it were, right?
Yeah, and community, I would say, is super huge. So we branded our own customer community and are starting to activate, and we have an in-person event coming up where we're bringing together our customer community. And so there's that piece of it too, where the our target audience is distributors, and so they tend to be in more traditional channels. They go to trade shows, they talk to one another. It's bizarre, but it does feel like that community piece and some more of those traditional marketing pieces are ways that they naturally walk through the world and accept information. And that's been a big flywheel. But it goes back to like when I've talked about the internal culture, external brand, content community flywheel, like that's really what we're trying to build. It's not really direct sales. It's not demand gen. It's really like how do we get our customers who are already really happy with us and where do we find different places for them to be able to share the fact like working with
Mm.
us. So it's a much more kind of natural flywheel of where I like to work.
I have another question, but one thing that you just said that has been interesting to me when I read the CMI report was types of content B2B marketers use in the last 12 months. 92% used short articles and posts. The next down was video, and the third was case studies, and it keeps going. But what was interesting to me about that is for all this talk that the marketers in our circles, at least, are talking about community building and internal influencers and all that,
Yeah.
that's not anywhere on the list. And like social media, blog, email, newsletter are the top distribution channels. But then there was this thing that said in-person events and webinars most popular and effective distribution channels.
Mm.
To me, what I'm reading into it is there's those of us talking about this next sort of version of content marketing. My book is literally all about this, where it's media first, human driven, and then the data is still showing that content marketers are not there. They're still
Yeah.
using the same old channels emerging. But the reason why that doesn't surprise me is through my work with clients and their clients, right? Those companies are still deploying the same tactics to the exclusion of any clear logic.
Yeah.
Literally nothing has changed.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I'm really grateful and the reason that I went in-house at this company is that the CEO always asks and always challenges if it's something like, "Oh, well, I did that at a previous company," or "That's just the way we do it," or "That's just how it's done." That's absolutely challenged, and I think that is it starts from the top, right? If you're just hearing to follow the old way of doing things or that this program or this production of assets or marketing programs is so rigid and don't look outside of the box and don't try anything new. If you're hearing that from top down, it's hard as a marketer to get out of that because we can challenge ourselves all day long, but without having it also like a challenging, I don't know, work relationship. And I mean that in like a way of prompting you to think in a different way. You're never going to do anything different, right? Like you're
No,
just going to stay in the same old box.
There was a customer of a client of mine that I worked with recently who our team was doing work for them and it wasn't working. And the agency knew why what we were doing for them wasn't working and knew what else to do. And they couldn't get the senior team to let them do it because there was a conflict with sales. Sales didn't want to change part of the process that would have led to this or consider a different setup. And I'm just trying to be
Yeah.
as generic as possible.
Yeah.
And so I was there helping out in several capacities, and they brought this to me and said, "Hey, we know we shouldn't be doing this for the customer, but we can't convince them to do anything else. And so they're probably gonna fire us anyway because it's not showing results, and we know why."
Yeah.
And so they asked for my help, and the challenge was our POC was too junior, and they didn't know how to have that conversation with their executive marketing team. And for months, we were stymied from doing anything differently, right? Because they just didn't have the power to make that argument well
Yeah.
and or experience rather. So I ended up getting on the phone with the leader of the marketing department and knowing that I was going to piss her off. And I was like, listen, this isn't working. We're wasting your money. And it was a hard conversation for me. I was really like, she meant business. And I felt bad because I had to go around the POC.
Yeah.
I was like, she's not the person that's going to help us through. So we end up having to escalate with her. And once we got to the right person, she's like, why are we doing it this way? What the hell? And so that was really interesting to me. I'm like, that's the same red tape, the
Yeah.
same convoluted setup, but that was not the goal, obviously. But anyway, it was
Yeah.
a perfect example of this is why we're not doing anything different.
And it's so funny because the whole purpose of marketing is influence.
Mhm.
That's what we do as marketers is try to influence like behavior, action, whatever it might be. And it is funny that I feel like this is the kind of tragic story that we see time and time again in marketing teams is like the inability for somebody to be able to influence inside of their own organization. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, but that is what we want to do as marketers anyways.
I think, well, at least for me, like I was always a thorn in anyone's side. So I pushed harder than most people do.
Yeah.
And so I think that helped me a lot. But I think that looking at a time when marketers are worried about keeping their jobs and it's a tight market, like they're not necessarily motivated to rock the boat because they want to keep their job, right?
Yeah.
But what I think is really fascinating is now that B2B has gotten into influencers, I think it's really weird that they're trying to find influencers to help them develop influence instead of developing that influence themselves, which is what these brands used to do in
Yeah.
our heyday. B2B brands used to have influence on their own,
Yeah.
and now they're outsourcing it to people who don't even work there. You know, and is it like, is that a silver bullet thing? Oh, it's faster that way or whatever. But it's jarring to me because it's like you understand that this could work, but you don't think about building that and, like, owning that influence yourself. You're outsourcing it to someone else who has it.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel there to like I've seen this switch in like the over reliance of paid ads versus actually building an audience, right? And I do feel like there's a bit of it that is, to your point, it's faster, right? We don't have to do the hard, steady work of building community and influence ourselves. We can just spend some money and outsource it. And it could be that that's just the pressure, too, of especially VC backed startups to get it off the ground super quickly and see some returns next month. But it is a shaky ground if that is your strategy because all of those things are not owned, right? Like we used to talk about this too with even like owning your own newsletter and owning your subscribers versus just building on social media platforms because the algorithm can change at any time and then might not reach your entire audience. And we're like, oh, you have to have your own newsletter and whatnot. And even then we realize that like email deliverability can be super tricky and algorithms can change there and all that kind of stuff. And it does feel to me that there's this like constant fight in marketing versus the slow, steady, right stuff to do to build a solid foundation versus the fast, hacky thing to just get some results. And I
Yeah.
know that marketers are constantly put in that hard place, but the ones that can do the slow, steady work of either building influence themselves, building their own community, building their own owned channels to be able to talk to their audience, those are going to be the companies that survive.
I agree with that. And I think to me, we just continue to have this same discussion as marketers about paid versus organic. An early stage company needs to do some kind of paid marketing, right? Like you can't go to an early stage company and be like, "Hi, we're going to build a content marketing program that in a year is going to yield results." And it goes back to the same fundamental problem with content with marketing strategy period, which is that from the leadership standpoint, it's still largely driven by industry standard or whatever the channel du jour is, when it should be about there is a whole toolkit. We have one particular type of thing we're building, so we only need these tools at this phase. We can stop using this tool and choose another one. So paid media, for example, I'm like, yeah, that could be a great way to come to market, to grow awareness and get early people into the product, depending on your pricing structure. And then while you're doing that, you're like, hey, we're gonna leverage the founders. This is founder-led sales, founder-led marketing. That's an owned audience that you don't have to build against the brand. You can
Yeah.
leverage. And so it's like doing that to me, I'm like, you don't even need to that's not a big investment.
Yeah.
And then once you get to a certain phase and you're ready to start building a more like consistent organic engine of some kind, then you can start layering those things on. But when you build around a founder, that's still an owned audience, even if it's on LinkedIn. Like if you're trying to build an audience around your brand on organic social, you are in trouble and wasting your time. But building it around the human is still extremely valuable because the way I've been doing it is I just take that audience now and let them know what I'm doing, and then I funnel them over to the thing. I use LinkedIn to be like, "Do you care about this? Cool. Can you go sign up over here and
Yeah.
I'll tell you more about it." And brands can still do that. That's not like a new thing. It's all
Mhm.
old stuff that always worked. But for some reason, a lot of companies are still doing marketing activities for some reason,
Yeah.
not a reason.
And I think that's what I pulled out too of Robert Rose's post is this idea of like how much stuff marketers have to do versus doing the things that we have confidence that they will work,
Yeah.
right? And even in that post, they were talking about like tech debt and does our analytics, can we trust them? Is it hooked up? Is the CRM actually in a clean, healthy place that we feel confident in, right? All of that type of work. And so what I've talked to a couple people internally. Right now, we're doing a bunch of internal work, but how I often will measure like the healthiness of a marketing organization is how much are they producing externally, right? And or do we have confidence that those things are working? And
Yeah.
there's so much that marketing teams have to, deal with on a daily basis of like all of the tech debt, all of the tooling, all of the stuff, all of the internal meetings, all of the alignment, all of the whatever. You can feel really busy, but it's like that idea of like, have you talked to your customers today? Have you put anything out there? Have you actually connected through the ether to your target audience?
Yeah.
And do we actually know if those things are working or not? And do we have confidence in doing it? And the other thing I think is like killing stuff, right?
Killing your
Kill
darling.
your darlings, right? Just because somebody at some point started this marketing program, started this channel, started this whatever, doesn't mean that's worth doing now or in the future, right? It could be that you need to kill it dead, the way that you're talking about with that agency and their customer. Kill this thing or let us do it differently. Please, God.
And it's such like, the reasons why they're not killing things and why they're not trying things are so fear-based. It's
Yeah.
all about hedging. And I hate to say it, but when I talk to these companies. The fact that whatever advice they're getting from their either investors or network is still these sort of old school way of we need SEO first. And it's insane to me that's still, despite the fact that every marketer is saying something completely different every single day on LinkedIn specifically and elsewhere. And there's still that. I'm like, it goes back to who the fuck are these people at these PEs and VCs who are making these recommendations? You know what I mean? It's like, where's the marketer to be like, nah, you're actually spending more money than you need to.
Yeah.
Literally, the amount of money I saw wasted this year through client work on not just not doing the right thing or not doing anything. So it wasn't just the missed opportunity cost. It was the like constantly changing your mind, hiring, rehiring. Like I quite literally set up something for a client that was working and they like lost it and then completely reversed it right when it was working. And it was just like, you know how much money you're wasting?
It's like a throwback to season 1 when we talked about executive thrashing, but
Yeah.
there's like a fine line between decisive leaders and executive thrashing, right? Like if you're too decisive on a short-term basis, you can be thrashy, right? Because you might be like, all right, kill it. All right, start this. All right, do this. And I
But
feel
even
like
that's wrong. That is fundamentally wrong because the founder shouldn't be saying that at all.
I'm not saying founder, I'm saying it just at the executive level, like maybe CMO or whatever for a larger team. But I'm saying like you have to be a decisive leader, but be decisive in the appropriate timeline or like altitude in order for that to not feel thrashy.
To me, it's more about if you've done your job right as a CMO or anyone who leads a marketing team or person, you have given them a set of expectations and a numerical goal of some numerical goal that they must move on a timeline. To me, you shouldn't have to say yes or no to anything.
Yeah.
You should be saying, okay, show it works and show signals that it's working along the way. Maybe you're approving the overall plan and giving feedback on or asking questions about certain tactics they recommend. But if you're doing your job well, it's just about setting expectations, being clear about agreeing with them on what data you will use to measure success and a cadence of reporting that makes sense for your business. And then it shouldn't be about decisions, right? I just think that's bad management.
And it happens all the time. I have said, not in my current role, but in a previous role, I remember saying out loud, just let me do this for a quarter. If it doesn't work, you can fire me,
Yeah.
but you gotta let me do some work. You gotta let me like fly. You gotta let me try. You gotta let me, and I might pivot in the middle of the quarter if I see it's not working, but I just need a period of time for me to go and do this consistently enough to see if it'll work or not. So many things get killed before they even can get started. And then you're doing all that just internal work of pitching new ideas and maybe should we do this? Should we do that? And that sort of indecision is an absolute killer.
Oh my gosh. That was literally me at a company. I built this whole community thing. Was it 2017, 2018? It's basically exactly what everyone's just catching on to today. And we invested developer resources, design resources, marketing resources, PR resources to doing this thing. And to this day, people still like mention that thing to me and they're like, "Oh, that was awesome." Like
Yeah.
their target customer who are now in my network and they killed it before we could even I think it was that I got fired, but no, my CMO left and then it was a whole thing, right? It was like a whole set of dominoes falling, but they were too scared. They're
Yeah.
too scared. Everybody's too scared. They like stopped taking any kind of risk. And I think that's what was exciting to me about startups when I first got into them is like people would take risks and they're simply not anymore. One of my good friends who I love dearly, who's making a very high quality product that I love, I have been trying to convince him to market his own company for years. Like years.
Yeah.
And to this day, I just recommended a friend of mine to work with him on something, and even still, it's the idea of writing anything that might be overtly not just markety, but just, like, have an objective. "Hi, I launched a product. I want you to do something
I
with the
want you to
product."
try it.
Yeah, and it's there's this still that allergic reaction to telling people what they want, which is funny because if you look at all the solopreneurs out there, the people making newsletters and they're all making the ask. Erica Schneider, she's the queen of launches. She has a whole art around it. And her audience, her followers, her customers, they love her.
Yeah.
At no point are they like, you emailed me too much or whatever. It's
Yeah.
like her growth, like the number of unsubscribes to, like, volume of subscribes and purchases is, like, non-existent, and I just think it's funny, it's like, do companies really deserve marketers anymore?
A good tagline. Do we even so I am thinking about this, and I do think that, like, when we started in our careers and that kind of heyday of SaaS, it was people, like, founders putting their neck out there, right? Like, it was at this time where it was like you could build like a SaaS company and it could go well. And it was uncharted territory of the fact that we were in the cloud now and PLG before we called it PLG. Like there was this like newness of the early adopters of even founders, right? Like probably their first company, maybe their second company. There was a newness. And I do think that over the last decade or so, however long we've been doing this for, the folks that now are software founders saw that there was a path to do it. And so
A playbook.
they're not charting their own territory anymore. They're just like, "Oh, I could be a software founder and I could raise some VC money and I'll just read the blog posts about the companies that have gone before me and done that and I'll try to do a smattering of those things." And the other thing that I was like going to touch on, so I do wonder if that I mean, I've no like validity. I've done no research on that, but it does feel directionally accurate that like the
Absolutely.
folks now just don't have that willingness to stick their neck out there and try something new. They're just trying to do the same thing that everyone else has done before them.
They leaned into that
Yeah.
by obsessing over ultimate guides and playbooks,
Yes.
making everyone feel like that was actually a thing that works,
Yeah.
which has
Yeah.
never
And
been
I'm like, the playbook worked because it was unique to that company and that's why it worked, not because that's the set of things that you need to do for you to have it work.
Also, it was on shaky ground because it was based on things like organic SEO and organic branded social, which have had huge transformation. Well,
Yeah.
maybe SEO less than organic branded social, but like,
Yeah.
those playbooks were based on things that very quickly
Has
changed.
changed, yeah. The other thing I was gonna tap into is, like, the people-pleasing nature of marketers, and we were talking too about if you wanna be in marketing, you have to be obsessed about how people get influenced, how people make decisions. I really do think that, like, the marketers that are obsessed with human psychology and trying to understand different humans' brains and how different things can be influenced are the ones that really work, and there is a certain I'm bringing it back to all the episodes. There's a certain audacity to then having to bring that internally of like, how does my leader make a decision? How does my CEO make a decision? How can I influence even within this organization? And it's so subtle, right? Like they did this study, and I just heard about this the other day, reheard about it the other day, and I thought it was fascinating. They did this study, I think it was in Central Park, where they had coffee and they walked up to random people, and half of the people they would say, "Oh, hey, can you hold this while I look at my phone?" Half of the people held a warm cup of coffee, half of the people held a cold cup of coffee. And then an hour later, they went and surveyed everyone, not having them know that this was a part of the experience, but they walked up and they gave them like $20 to read a short story. And then they asked them about the main character. And the people that held the iced coffee an hour before described the main character as like cold and like bad. And the people that held the warm coffee had a more like warm perception of this like fictional character in this short story. And so it's if you think about human psychology and the fact that we can be influenced an hour before by the temperature of our hands to like what we're experiencing or what we're reading through the lines on, isn't that fascinating? Don't we want to
Yeah.
like I don't know, like, that to me is, like, the rabbit hole that me as a marketer wants to go down and understand what are all the different steps and how might I be turning somebody off or on at any given moment in their entire storyline with me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the illustrative things is about building this YouTube channel has been the drastic difference between the B2B audience and like the general public where like a survey like that is done. Because the B2B buyer, like everyone in our industry, there's a certain level of in culture, in the internet. And so I think that there's a reason why our type of marketing is different, right? Like
Yeah.
when I record a YouTube video, I'm speaking in a different way. This isn't a spectrum of intelligence, right? I'm
Mhm.
just speaking differently. And what's I think this thing that it comes down to for me is like marketers still don't know how to make the case for their own ideas. And so they struggle to show leadership why it should be done. And they can't really, I think it's hard for them on the fly because this was me early on in my marketing career to be able to have an argument or a discussion about it because typically your executives or founders are very either business, financial, engineering focused. And so they immediately go there. Whereas, like a marketer, to your point, we're more about the soft skills. And then there's this second cohort that I keep running into of marketers who just have decided that they have these limitations
Mm.
that they don't. If someone doesn't say yes, they're like, "Well, I can't." Like, "Did you try anything at all?"
Mhm.
And they're like, "Well, I can't because I might lose my job." I'm like, "That's a lot." Like, you went to this weird place. Like, you have a lot more leeway than you think.
Yeah.
Especially if you're, like, pushing something in a sophisticated way, that's, like, the other side contributor. It's like founders and executives are still nightmares, and they don't know anything about marketing, and they keep acting like they do, thus leading to really bad decisions that are quite literally, at this point I wish someone would do a study on this, where it's like, your dumb marketing decisions are holding back your company's viability for success. I bet there are companies that have failed based on this.
Oh, yeah.
And that missed out on revenue because they were too afraid to take a tiny risk in marketing tactics.
Yep.
And so invested a ton of money elsewhere where it was never going to work in the first place or not return the same results.
Yeah. Mic drop. Agreed. Double stamped, triple stamped.
So basically, nothing has changed at all except for
Everything.
yeah.
And
Well, no,
also
no, except for literally nothing.
yeah,
The only thing that's changed is
the efficacy.
there aren't a lot of full-time marketing jobs right now. Even agencies had a tough year. Now that might be changing a little bit, but every single other thing in the world is the same.
Well, I think at the end of the day, even though channels and tactics and methods have changed, human beings take a lot longer to change than all of the information channels and whatnot. And we're even seeing that internally, right? Where we've talked about this, we've talked about it on multiple seasons, and you and I are still frustrated with the pace of change and the pace of human beings changing. And I think that that's like both a good and bad thing, right? As a marketer to understand that all of these other things might be changing, but human beings fundamentally still want to feel smart,
Same.
sexy, sense of belonging, whatever it might be. Like we like the human beings haven't really changed. And while that's
No.
frustrating internally to get people to change or to influence people, the good thing is marketing messages can stay consistent if you can get them right.
Yeah. And also, I would just add to that, that humans are still largely making fear-based decisions, and it's super boring. I see it everywhere now. I'm like, "Oh, you're just scared, and you don't know that you're scared." And so everybody is so scared
Yeah.
all the time, and it is so boring. I'm like, I multiple times have been on the verge of, like, quite literal ruin, either financially or my aliveness, like,
Yeah.
my
I was gonna
actual
say
right?
on
And
the
it's like
verge of death.
yeah, and it's like, I just don't understand, like, why people who have the capacity for risk without risking their life or their entire financial stability aren't doing it. I'm like, this is not a catastrophic thing you're talking about. And you're like really afraid. Like you're afraid of a marketing tactic, or you're afraid to do something that you've never seen done before and you don't have proof of working. I'm like, wasn't that the whole
Point.
premise of startups to begin with?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so it's so boring. I think that's a prevailing thing. Even in Robert Rose's post, you could almost hear it where I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's, we're bored.
Yeah.
Somebody put their pants on.
You look around the world, and once you realize that it's all made up, it's all made up. Somebody made a decision to paint my house this color. Somebody made a decision to call the road North Street. You know what I mean? Like it's all made up. And I think once you start seeing that, it's hard to not want to make it up yourself, but you have to be able to see that first and see the possibility of it.
Okay, y'all, that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, for listening.
We'll be back next week. And just remember, you're doing great. You're doing great.
30% of you are doing great. The rest, you got to get your shit together. Come on.
You know which side you're on this week.
You know.
You know. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, wait. My friend, what? Was that loud?
No, I don't know why I'm making that face, honestly. Like, I swear to God, I think I was just like, how do I stay awake? And that's what that face, like, I didn't even notice. I was looking at you. And so you're like,
Your face just looks shocked for no reason.